Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Complicated Creation. This will be Part 10, Chapter 8, entitled Not Every Price is Paid in Blood. The sky turns black, as though a giant curtain is drawn across it. The air is filled with the sound of birds, almost entirely crows, but Izuku knows there are ravens and rooks, jackdaws and magpies, and probably more. He'd done all the research he could when he'd finally found his way back to humanity from the spirit realm the first time. He'd thought that knowing about the crows would help him prepare for this, if it ever had to happen again. It doesn't really help. Soon there are black birds on every possible surface and spiraling around them in the sky. The cacophony of sound is nearly overwhelming, but Izuku grits his teeth and waits, staring at the roof of the shrine where he would have, just stepped through with Eraserhead and been home, even if he doesn't exactly have a place that is his. The human realm is home in a way this place will never be, and times like this prove why. A mass of birds congregate on top of the shrine, landing in a pile of bodies that grows and undulates and collapses into itself before surging upwards into one huge bird, one huge crow, glossy black from beak to tail, and beady eyes looking down at Izuku and their ragtag group with curiosity. "I did not think you would ever call my name, Izuku Midoriya," the crow god says, the use of his name twisting in Izuku's gut. "You and I had an agreement." "We don't have a lot of time for pleasantries," Izuku says, even as he bows low. He never wanted to speak to the crow god ever again. If he'd had a choice, they'd never cross paths. If he had any choice at all, but he doesn't. He never does. When it's a choice between letting someone else suffer or helping, there's only one thing he can do. He straightens from his bow, meets the god's gaze. "Messenger, I need you to take me and Eraserhead to Usagi's human safely, quickly, before she can't be saved." The crow god shifts his weight, head tilting back and forth so it can take in their party. His beak is large enough to swallow Izuku whole. He'd tried that, when Izuku had finally fought himself free of the god's control. "Interesting proposition. But I already have your name, unless you have a new one to give me. You don't have something equal in power I could want in exchange." He doesn't have the raw power for travel, Izuku knows all too well, but that's because travel like this isn't what he does, even if they call him their bridge. He could, he thinks, reach out and just take what he needed from the crow god. He doesn't know what that might do, to himself or to the god, but he's pretty sure he could do it. It doesn't mean he wants to, or even considers it. He will not take, not unless there is absolutely no other option, and even then, to just take makes him something terrible, no matter what Eraserhead has said. He will not be the monster they want him to be, and he will not offer himself as a servant ever again. "I have something else to trade," he tells the crow, their collection as a whole, and ignores the way Eraserhead goes tense, ignores the way Tamamonome keeps the hero from interrupting. Crows like bright things. They like entertaining things, like the brilliant and the bold. The god of the crows is brash and cunning and powerful, and Izuku only has one thing he thinks might be enough: to save a girl trapped because of bullies and afraid because of her quirk. He doesn't have the right power, but he does have the memories. He holds in his hand what starts as a spark but flickers like a firework, and then turns into a flame, bright orange and smelling faintly sweet. Inside of it is determination, a bombastic personality and a drive to be the best, to be a hero, and all the faith Izuku has carried for years that Bakugo Katsuki is going to be amazing. Of course he got into UA. Of course he's in Class 1A. They dreamed about it when they'd been young, before Izuku was Deku and everything changed. He'd never forgotten, even if he's sure Bakugo has forgotten him. He'd never stopped hoping he'd see Bakugo in his hero costume, maybe training, or when he fully got his license. He'd probably work for All Might. Izuku's never doubted Kacchan, that he'd always reach his goals. The flame grows even brighter. In it goes the memories of hearing Bakugo had been kidnapped by the League, the fear and frustration and fury as the reporters tried to suggest Bakugo would be a villain, would ever be a villain. Despite all the times Bakugo's spirit, a snake-like bird with human features but a razor-sharp beak, had hurt him, he'd been so happy when it found him to ask him for his help. He'd given the hero students the information when he'd realized what they were going to do. They'd be able to help Bakugo more than he could, after all, and Bakugo wouldn't want to be rescued by a quirkless nobody. The flame is almost too bright to look at now. "Safe transport, messenger, for myself and Eraserhead. We arrive in time to save her. Time, for the gods of this place, means almost nothing. And I will give you Kachan in exchange. He lifts the flame into the air. It's this or his mother, at this point, and Izuku doesn't know what he'll do if he has to choose between her memory and his morals. A single crow flies forward, and is consumed by the flames, but Izuku doesn't flinch. He knows the god is testing the memory, ensuring the value of their trade. Deku, what? Eraserhead says, and Izuku is realizing he's standing beside him, and reaching to touch him, and Izuku can't explain this, not right now. Not while there's a god he must bargain with, and a little girl at risk, and a precious memory in his hands. But Tamamo takes the scarf she'd made the hero in her teeth, and pulls him back and away. Thankfully, he doesn't fight her. This Kachan, in exchange for safe passage, time to save the child. She is very nearly dead as we speak. The god intones. There's acceptance in his words. You human lovers are all the same, trying to save what always returns to me in the end. He raises himself up, wings spread so wide they fill Izuku's field of view. I am the messenger of the gods, and the god of all messengers. I am knowledge and wisdom in all tongues. I agree to your terms. Kachan for safe transport for us to save a child. Izuku agrees and holds his own hand higher, palm flat. He wonders if Bakugo ever missed him. He probably won't be able to now. I am Deku. It's not all bad, though. He manages a tiny smile. I am Problem Child, and I agree to your terms. The crow god croaks once, and the air fills with the beating of wings as 1,000 of his messengers descend upon Izuku. He's covered for a moment as they peck at the memory until there's nothing left to remember. When they disperse, they leave him with tears on his face that he rubs away. He's crying, and he knows, in theory, why he's crying. He also knows why he doesn't know why he's crying. He hates forgetting something. He takes 3 steps to Eraserhead and Tamamo, both of whom look stricken. It's okay, he assures them, and he can't lie here. He is fine. I'll be all right. We should go. He gestures to the hair, and it leaps up and lands on his head. It seems a bit subdued despite the state of his human. Now, please, he tells the crow god before they can all fuss. The crow is the messenger god, and the god of messengers, among many of the other titles Izuku has learned since their first meeting. He can deliver them with no trouble, moving from one realm to another, or one world, or any other space at all. While Izuku needs power he does not possess, and edges and shrines in areas where the world is thin, this god needs nothing. The god of crows simply goes. Wings surround the 4 of them. Izuku hadn't included Tamamo in the agreement because wherever her human went she could be at will. And the same for Nosagi, but the god includes them nonetheless. The sensation of travel by god is very different than traveling by shrine. Izuku lands on his feet a moment later and feels no different than he had a moment before, instead of the exhaustion and nausea that usually follows. Eraserhead looks likewise whole. The hair jumps from his head. They're in a wooded area, and in front of them is a clearly abandoned house, overgrown but still mostly intact. Here, in here, in here! Nosagi, and what a name. He wonders how old it is, if it simply doesn't have any other common names yet, leads them inside. Izuku hurries behind the spirit, and Eraserhead follows at his heels. The house is a simple one, and the decorations inside make it look more than 50 years old, but the interior isn't particularly terrible considering that leaves and dirt have blown in, and there's signs of water damage. But there are still photos on the walls, and magazines rotting next to the ancient-looking armchair. They run past all of that to the stairs, which are warped with age. It's worrying, but Izuku tests them, with his weight on the side next to the wall, and it holds enough for him to scurry up behind Nosagi, and into what was probably the master bedroom once. There's a huge wooden chest at the foot of the decrepit bed, with a very new and shiny padlock on the ancient wood. The room is utterly silent, even as Izuku watches the padlock shutter over and over again, as if someone were pounding the chest soundlessly from the inside. There's no key to be seen, and pulling on the lock does nothing. What's her name? He asks the spirit as Eraserhead thunders in behind him. Yuna, he answers without question. She can hear you, please tell her it's all right. Yuna, it's going to be okay, Izuku calls to assure her, as Eraserhead moves him aside. He takes one look at the chest and the lock and brings his heel down on the metal holding the lock in place. The ancient wood splinters away, and they lift the lid to find a girl who can't be more than 8 or 9 curled inside, crying desperately and silently, and so clearly terrified until Izuku points to Eraserhead and says, "It's okay. He's a hero." She throws herself at Eraserhead, and he catches her gently. Izuku watches as he pats her back and tries to calm her, but her breathing doesn't even out. "Usagi, do you know where her medicine is?" The spirit, running circles around his human, shakes his head. Izuku sighs and kneels next to her. If she has asthma, this could be very bad. Asking the crow god to bring them in time to save her still allowed far too much to go wrong from this point, really, but he hadn't considered that. He should have. He reaches through the dozens of small tethers that are connected to him. "Zahira," he calls out, and also gives the name a mental tug. A moment later, the spirit, a tiny sylph, appears. "Hello again. Can you help her?" Her wings flutter as she flies around the girl, and Eraserhead unnoticed, examining Yuna with a critical eye. She nods. "In exchange for one of our debts?" "Yes," Izuku nods. She'd been caught in an old-fashioned spirit trap a year ago, and he'd spent the better part of an hour detangling her from it. Her powers were limited to simple fixes and minor healing, but she'd been grateful enough to give him 5 times to call on her. Now would make the 3rd time. She glows, and Izuku sets his hand on Yuna's shoulder to channel her power. "You're going to feel better in just a second," he tells her. "Just keep trying to breathe, and it'll get easier, all right?" "I think she has asthma," Eraserhead warns, looking at the girl in concern. "We need to get her to a hospital." "I asked a spirit to help," Izuku assures him, and sure enough, a moment later they see her take a deep breath, and then another, and her lips look far less blue. "There we go, it's all right," he tells her again. "My name's Deku, and this is Eraserhead. He's an amazing hero." She begins to sign, which makes sense. If her quirk is so out of control she can't make noise, she probably can't speak. "I don't know much sign," he admits, but then Eraserhead is nodding and Izuku realizes that he can, when he replies. "Deku has a quirk that lets him sense other quirks and modify them," the hero tells the girl, lying easily. "That's how we found you. Are you hurt?" She holds out her hands, then blinks in surprise at the lack of cuts or bruises on her fingers. Zahira grins and flits about her head. "That one was all me. No, you meant just her lungs, but the poor thing had beaten them bloody, and how could I leave her like that?" "Thank you," Usagi says and bows low to the sylph. "She's my first human." "I can tell." The sylph zips around the hair. "Don't worry, you'll get better with practice." She turns midair and circles Izuku's head. "Call on me again when you need me, monster boy. I still owe you." Izuku smiles as she leaves and focuses back on Eraserhead and Yuna, who are discussing where she lives in relation to this old house. "If you can walk here from your house," Eraserhead is saying, "we can take you straight home. You'll just need to direct us." She nods and tries to stand up, but her legs wobble and she struggles to hold up her weight. "She was probably in there a while." Izuku looks at the broken trunk and the new lock. "They planned that, too." "Don't worry," Eraserhead says, with a tone that implies retribution, so clearly Izuku feels a shiver down his spine. "I intend to investigate that. For now, however," he turns and offers her his back. "Climb up. I might look a bit of a mess, but that's because we just came from a villain battle. I'm sure Deku here can explain it to you while we take you home." "Of course." Deku can tell the hero is trying to help Yuna feel better. "I don't really know sign, but I can fingerspell," he tells her as they make their way carefully down the decrepit stairs. "What's Eraserhead's quirk?" she asks while they step out into the sunlight. Deku wonders what day it is and is almost afraid to ask. They'll figure out that later. For now, they have to make sure Yuna is looked after and never has to feel afraid like that again. "Eraserhead has an amazing quirk," he tells her as they follow a well-worn trail back to the street. "Do you know there are 3 main types of quirks? There's mutations, emitter, and transformation types, and—" Yuna falls asleep, on his back about halfway to her home. A combination of exhaustion and her asthma tiring her out, if Shota has to guess. They're saved from having to wake her by Deku asking her spirit for directions. "That's how I found you and the others," the kid says as they head down the street. They must look terrible. Shota's suit is caked with dried blood and has a hole torn in the shoulder, and his pant legs are split halfway up his shins and hang loose. And Deku looks like he's been sleeping on the streets, which he has. They're attracting attention, but not enough for anyone to call out yet. I'm actually amazed her spirit knew her school name. Most aren't good at paying that sort of attention. No, really, he says to the side, talking to the hair, perhaps. Shota sees nothing and feels nothing now. You knowing her school was important. Anyway, they know where their human is, and they can usually lead me to where their human stays or goes to work, but they're pretty terrible at things like distances or time or names of things that would be useful when they ask for help. Speaking of spirits, Shota begins carefully, because Deku seems far too calm after everything that's just happened. You gave something to the crows to get us here. It seemed important. Which is a goddamn understatement, but he doesn't know how else to even begin. Shota hates the fact that the kid had to sacrifice anything for his sake, even if the girl on his back is a testament to why. What was it? Oh, I don't remember. Deku shrugs, but his voice is at least quiet and reserved. It was a memory of someone. They're pretty powerful to trade, so I try not to. And I don't actually have a lot of people who are important enough, but it was an emergency. I think I knew them a while ago, when I was a kid, so they probably don't even remember me. He shrugs again. It's okay. Shota thinks about Kachan and the way Deku had been crying when he'd returned to them. It leaves him feeling sick. How do you get it back? He asks, though he suspects he knows the answer. He'd heard the crow call Deku by another name, but he can't remember it. It had flowed through his mind like water, through open hands, and not even the shape of it remains. You don't get back what you trade, Deku shrugs once more. You'd have to trade something else for it, and if I had that kind of power, I wouldn't have had to trade at all. He points down the street towards a neighborhood made of connected townhouses. She lives there, he says, and then ducks sharply, moving like he's dodging a wasp, except Shota can't see anything at all. It's frustrating to be able to see why people must have misjudged this kid so badly. Another spirit, he asks once Deku's done ducking. Hitoshi's, Deku tells him and glares at something a few feet above and to the left. They've been worried about you. Can it hear me? Shota asks, curious. His spirit can apparently listen in on him, after all. When Deku nods, he looks where Deku seems to be staring and offers a glare of his own. I appreciate your worry, but Deku's been responsible for my well-being. We're going to bring this child home, and then I will call Hisashi. Do not attack Deku, or I will encourage him to defend himself against you. There, it's the best he can do against something he can't see or affect. Deku gives him a look of surprise at first that morphs into something like quiet happiness as they continue down the street. Thanks, he says, looking at his shoes. You didn't have to. Shinso's spirit didn't need to attack you, he retorts. It's obvious I'm here and whole. Yeah, well, they might think I kidnapped you? Deku was somehow far too chagrined for that statement. Sorry. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault, problem child. Shota will clear things with everyone soon enough. I recall you saving my life. Deku scuffs a foot and doesn't argue further. The home they arrive at is simple and well kept, and the woman who answers the door takes one look at the girl asleep on Shota's shoulder and bursts into tears. My baby! She shouts, and Shota's the one to take charge at that, because dealing with hysterics is absolutely a training module for second-year students and mandatory for any hero worth their salt. They're hustled inside once Shota explains his credentials and shows his hero license, and the family thankfully don't question his appearance after he explains he'd been dealing with a villain before. There's no need to explain the details of that, after all. What's more important is informing the girl's parents that they need to file a police report, and Aizawa doesn't let them consider brushing it off as bullying. The girl could very well have died, and just because it had hopefully been meant more as a prank than murder doesn't change that fact. They don't need much arguing to agree. Yuna's apparently been the target of a lot, considering she can't speak up for herself. Shota watches as Deku shrinks more and more into himself at the information, and he sets a hand on the kid's shoulder, as the parents make the call to ask for an officer. That's a good step one. Now, I need to make a call or two of my own, and I lost my cell in the fight. He tells the parents, and they graciously allow him to use their phone. He settles in the kitchen for a bit of privacy, while Deku uses the restroom. Hello? Hisashi's voice is cautious, probably because he doesn't recognize the number, and Shota called his hero line. Hisashi doesn't answer anyone on his personal phone he doesn't recognize. It's me. I'm fine. Shota! Yes, I'm alive. I'm in Miyazaki with... Shota, we've been looking for you for the last 4 days. How are you on Kyushu? Did you get away? You were injured. Do you need help? Do we... Hisashi, breathe, Shota says sharply. I am fine. I called you first, but I need to call Tsukauchi and give him a report, and also get him to pull us some strings for a flight home, because I'm not in the mood for 17 hours of transit. I wasn't kidnapped, in case you were wondering. You remember the kid from the quirk case, Deku? Suji Kurata said he was the one who didn't kidnap you. Shota sighs, but it's a start. Right, well, I was injured, and he got me out of there. The rest is complicated, and I can't get into it over the phone. But can you get my office set up to look something like a space someone could sleep in? We adopting another kid, Shota? Hizashi teases, but Shota can hear the relief in his voice. We might be, he tells him, just for the way that Hizashi sputters. Now, I'm fine. I'm sorry I worried you. I'll explain it all when I'm home. Tell Hitoshi I'm sorry and warn him we'll have some company. He can't imagine how worried they must have been. Time with Deku had been strange, but hadn't felt that long. Hours, not days. His students must be assuming the worst as well. Shota's never missed more than a day or two of class without warning. Shota, promise me you're all right, Hizashi says, quieter now. My idea of the word, not yours. I look even more like a vagrant than I usually do, Shota warns him. I have a new scar on my chest, but it's healed, like it's years old, Hizashi, and while I'm tired and angry and want to eat my weight in noodles, I'm fine, I promise. Hizashi breathes out. I'll tell Hitoshi. You're going to call the police. You realize we've got about 20 different heroes on your case trying to find you two. That's why I need to call the detective, Shota agrees. So I'm going to hang up now. I'll see you in a few hours. My cell phone is missing, so don't blow it up any more than you already have. The police have your phone, Hizashi tells him, and Shota can only feel guilty all over again because that probably made everything seem worse. I'll let you call them, just get home safe. I will, Shota says, and has to smile a little at that. Deku made a promise to someone important to make sure of it. Izuku drinks from the tap and dries his hands on his pants, rather than risk leaving marks on anything in the Sakamoto bathroom. He knows he knows what he looks like. He's done his best, since running away from Kotobukicho, but having to go pay for public baths and laundry without having steady work meant he'd sometimes be choosing between eating and being clean. The people in Minami Ward are just as poor as people were in Kotobukicho, or worse, made odd jobs for cash a lot less regular, and he'd been stuck with collecting cans and recycling when he felt he could risk going out. Still, he thought it was better than getting caught again, and being around so many shrines meant he could get all sorts of regular wards to keep the spirits away. He plastered that office building with them. A lot of good that did him in the end, anyway. He steps back out, into the house that is warm and nicely decorated. It doesn't look like his old home at all. His mother's apartment had been cool, white walls and golden brown flooring with simple, affordable furniture. The Sakamoto's home is dark wood and plush couches and even has a second floor, but it still makes him ache in memory. Yuna's mother is sitting on the couch with her daughter, holding her hands and speaking quietly, trying not to cry again. Her father is on the balcony, leaning on the railing and smoking a cigarette, body a line of anger Izuku can read even from here. He doesn't need to be told this has happened before, and he knows, no matter what gets said to the adults, it's going to happen again. He can't stop bullies, not really. He can't make people kinder, or wiser, or braver. He can't be the sort of hero who rescues people and says, I'm here, with a smile on his face, even though he'd dreamed for so long of just that. Izuku pulls the marker from his pocket and sits on the floor by Yuna and her mother, the latter looking at him warily. I have a quirk, he lies, the way he usually does when this happens. It lets me see when someone has a quirk that doesn't work the right way for them, and sometimes I can fix it. Mrs. Sakamoto looks dubious, but Yuna seems to sniffle, not that he can hear it, and nods to show she's listening, so Izuku presses on. I don't think your quirk is broken. You have an amazing quirk that could be used for so many awesome things. You could be an amazing hero, of course, especially an underground one like Eraserhead is, but you could also be a special investigator with the police, or you could work with musicians and sound recording stations to be a silent assistant, or you could work in special effects, or you could work with nature because you could move without making noise and not scare the animals. And that's if you want to use your quirk. There's a lot of people who never rely on their quirk at all, and that's okay too. The last thing he's going to tell an 8-year-old is that she's broken. They don't need another Deku in the world. But your quirk is an emitter type, he tells her. She's staring at him intently now, leaning forward. You remember I was talking about quirk types while Eraserhead carried you? Your quirk is the sort that usually has, an on-off switch, like a light bulb, and yours didn't get one. Some people don't. But I bet you know people who can use their quirk when they want to and stop when they don't, right? Auntie Maya, her mother translates for Izuku, and Ito-sensei, and Shiho. Well, Izuku takes a breath. I can sometimes help people who don't have that switch. Well, have one. If you'd like. Then you could make noise when you wanted to and be quiet when you wanted to. And you'd be able to call for help, he doesn't add, though he sees the realization dawn on her mother's face as she gasps, hands quickly covering her open mouth. But it's your choice, Izuku stresses. Only if you want to. The flurry of sign is far too fast for him to follow, but her mother translates again, voice thick. What do I need to do? Izuku holds up his marker. It's easy. I just have to draw on the back of your hand, then on mine, and you have to stay on the couch for a bit, that's it. It might not work, but I think it will, if you want me to try. She nods eagerly, but looks to her mother, who eyes Izuku uncertainly. Is there any danger? He shakes his head. None. I can't hurt her quirk. Well, he can, but he won't. He'd have to be doing it intentionally, and it won't happen by accident here. At best, she can control it, and at worst, nothing will happen. It's a bit risky. He usually does this with kids in playgrounds when their parents aren't around, or to adults who can make their own decisions. He doesn't have a license, of course, but he'll never be able to have one. All right, she says, the decision to snap one, and her eyes pleading. Yuna eagerly thrusts out her hand and goes a little cross-eyed looking at the sigil when Izuku finishes it, and adds a matching one to his own hand, tucking his marker away and sitting back on his heels. I'm just going to meditate, he tells them. It's as good a description for what he does as any. You won't feel or notice anything at all. At least he can be sure about that. Going in and changing quirks hasn't ever had any effect on anyone, unless he's gone in to try and stop their quirk, and that's not something he wants to do ever, especially not here. So he closes his eyes and feels for the connection, the matching sigils on their hands, a channel he can move between. It's different for every person. Sun Eater had been like swimming in the ocean, the water dark but his power bioluminescent all around them, detached and drifting. He'd gathered it together in his mental arms and pulled it down to the volcanic vents that was Sun Eater's self. Izuku doesn't know what to call the core of people he touches, like this. Souls makes him feel almost wrong for doing it. Yuna is the opposite of deep water. All around her grows something, wheat maybe, but it towers over her core, towers over Izuku, glows brilliantly golden all the way through her. Her quirk is beautiful, and he can see the care no Sagi put into it. It makes sense from here. The spirit wanted to give his first human a chance to hide from danger in a world that seemed threatening, a chance to make herself unnoticed and silent. For a hare, it would make sense. They fight what they can and hide from what they can't, after all. He just gave her too much. He doesn't try to cut back the golden glow. He'd meant what he said, that her quirk is amazing, and there's nothing wrong with it. She doesn't need her quirk to be cut away from her, and the spirit's power had genuinely been meant as a gift. Instead, Izuku reaches for her core, the part of her around which the power flows, and he raises it. It's more complex than that, of course, but even he doesn't understand all what he does, and when it's based on feelings and not words, when there are no words for what he sees and feels and does. He lifts her up, inside of herself, and when he's done, the glow that runs through her is no longer obliterating her from his mind's eye. When he steps back into himself and opens his eyes, he meets her expectant gaze and he smiles. Try making some noise now. Hesitantly, so very hesitantly, she opens her mouth and says, Hi. Her mother bursts into tears, and Izuku nearly jumps out of his skin when her father pats him on the back with enough force to bowl him over. When he gets to his feet, Eraserhead is looking down at him, eyes hard but lips quirked in a tiny smile. Good work, kid, he says, and he even sounds pleased for a moment before he frowns again. Even if I should give you hell for quirk use. Izuku very nearly panics, but Eraserhead puts a hand on his shoulder, and while it isn't a hug, here in front of all these people, that would be really weird, the hero pulls him closer, and doesn't let go. The police have always been a part of his work, and at times like these, Tsukauchi is a godsend. Is he going to be constantly questioning using God in his mental phrases? Shota wonders. The call to him is a straightforward one, and he promises to pass information along to the other heroes and to Surigame, who can make the arrangements to get them home. More than anything, Shota wants to go home, to his kid and husband, and eat a meal and have a shower, and give Deku the same. Then They can worry about a debrief and everything that needs to follow. Then he can sleep for a week. He'd watched Deku sit on the floor of the Sakamoto home, and it's the same as when they'd had him in the precinct, the same as Uraraka and Hamajiki had described. Deku simply sits, and nothing seems to happen as the world waits in silence around him. And then a little girl who, up until this moment, could make sounds only she could hear, speaks to her parents verbally for the first time. He will never be able to forgive just how badly society fucked up with this kid. He wonders how many more are like him, out there. Maybe not the spirits, but unknown or misunderstood quirks. Or hell, maybe even spirits. At this point, he's not going to judge anything at all. The police arrive and Shota gives his statement, with a bit of hand-waving on how they found the girl, stumbling on her during another investigation with help from Deku. And they duck out before anyone can ask too many pointed questions about her sudden ability to control their quirk, as the local hero agency sends a car to collect them. The chief of police has pulled strings to get them on a flight home, and Shota leaves a business card in case the local police need to follow up. The way to the airport is tense for several reasons, the largest of which is the fact that Shota sits in the back seat next to Deku instead of in the front. The kid seems to sink lower and lower into his seat as they drive, until he mutters, "I'm not going to run off. I can't." "I don't think you will," Shota tells him. For one thing, he's pretty sure whatever the kid uses for power is out as far as travel goes based on the context clues. For another, the kid is tired. He's tired of being alone and being disbelieved and being hurt for the shit he can't help, and he's clearly tired of trusting and being burnt for it. "I told the detective we'd go in for a debrief after some food and a change of clothes. You're smaller than Shinso, but I think we can find something that'll fit. I'll take you shopping this week for things for yourself." Deku looks at him, and Shota gets a rare moment of speechlessness from the kid, who finally manages a strangled, uncertain, "What?" "Clothes. I'm not saying you have to get rid of the hoodie, but we should get you some other options that don't make it look like you've been dragged behind a truck through farmland for fun. Also, new shoes. Those can't be waterproof. I'll send someone to collect your stuff from that building as well, unless you'd rather do it yourself. It would be an annoying trip to make, but they can do it, especially if Deku's squirreled away personal possessions in hidden spots." The kid grips the hem of his hoodie and twists it hard enough Shota thinks it might rip. "I can look after myself." "Bet you wouldn't be able to say that if we took a trip back to the other side," Shota retorts. "I'm not dumping you in care, problem child. You're coming home with me." Deku's head snaps up so hard he's surprised he doesn't hear it crack. "What?" "You heard me." Shota meets his gaze and doesn't flinch away at the way Deku's emotions are painted all across his face like a terrible modern art piece. "We've got space for you, with some moving around. You need food and a bed and new clothes and people who believe you. So I'm offering that. You can stick around. Shinso actually asked me why we didn't believe you. To begin with, I should have listened to him. Auntie and Izashi, that's Present Mike, will believe me about you, so that's 2 more people who will listen to what you say. And if you decide it's too much and want to go elsewhere, I'll help you do that, if you let me. But if you run away again, at least you'll know where we are and how to find us." He smiles. It isn't his most reassuring smile. "I suspect if you run away, Tamamonome will just give you hell for it, though. She seems very stubborn." Deku laughs a little watery, a little uncertain. "You don't have to," he offers, but Shota can see he wants it. "You didn't have to save my life," Shota points out. "Or trust me a second time, but you did. You didn't have to give up something precious to save that girl without abandoning me, but you did. Just because you can eke out a life on your own doesn't mean you're supposed to, so let me help." Deku blinks rapidly and nods, his voice thick as he stares at his knees, and says, "Thanks." So quietly Shota can barely hear it. "That's fine. Thank me after a week of hearing Hizashi snore. And problem child." Deku looks back up at him. "You can call me Aizawa. I'm Shota Aizawa." The smile from Deku is so bright, Shota feels like the whole car lights up from it. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 8 of Complicated Creation. Chapter 9 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this fic. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far. And as always, thank you so much for listening.